My mother shoved a sticky pink car seat into my arms, kissed my sister's kids like she was heading off to war, and said, "Don't ruin Christmas for once." Then, she got in the SUV with my sister, pulled the door shut, and drove away before I could get my suitcase out of the trunk. I was standing in my mother's driveway in 6-degree Indiana air, with 4 children under 10, one half-empty inhaler, a diaper bag full of crackers and no medication chart, and a turkey still hard as a brick in the sink. Her phone went dark before the taillights reached the stop sign. My sister's phone went dark 10 seconds later, and that was the exact moment I understood I had not been flown home for the holidays. I had been delivered. By 12:16 that night, I was sitting in urgent care with my 7-year-old niece wheezing against my shoulder, and a nurse was asking me a question I couldn't answer. "Are you the legal guardian, or did they leave any consent forms?" They hadn't left forms. They hadn't left instructions. They hadn't even left enough pull-ups for the twins. What my mother and sister did not know was that I hadn't come home begging for closeness or trying to patch up old wounds. I came home with a thick red envelope in my carry-on from my grandmother's attorney, and inside it were enough signed pages, account statements, and handwritten notes to decide who got the lake house, who got cut off, and who would finally have to explain where $18,400 had gone. 21 hours after they dumped those kids on me, the same people who called me selfish, cold, and dramatic were calling 34 times in a row, sending voice notes they instantly regretted, and asking relatives to, please not jump to conclusions. That was when I knew they had finally seen the first screenshot. The humiliation started before the SUV even backed out. Rachel was already wearing makeup for a trip she had sworn wasn't happening. Not Christmas makeup. Full face, soft bronze eyeshadow, lip liner, gold hoops. Her overnight bag was tucked behind the third-row seat. My mother's leopard print weekender was beside it. I noticed all of that in about 2 seconds. What I noticed next was worse. Mrs. Holcomb from across the street was standing at her mailbox watching us. My mother knew she was there. That mattered, because my mother only performed when she had an audience. She lifted her voice just enough and said, "Caroline, your sister needs one little break. Since you're always saying family should matter more than work, here's your chance to prove it." I had never said that in my life. Rachel laughed, not a nervous laugh, a satisfied one. "You don't have kids, you don't have a husband, and you flew in with one suitcase. What exactly are we interrupting?" The twins were already clinging to my coat. Mason, the oldest, had his Nintendo dangling from one hand in that hollow, alert look kids get when they know something bad is happening, but they're trying to look brave, so adults won't get worse. I said, "No, absolutely not. I was invited for Christmas dinner, not ambushed into childcare." My mother's face changed instantly. Sweet Church Linda disappeared. The real one came out. She leaned in so close, I could smell her peppermint gum, and said, very quietly, "After everything I've done for you, you can survive 48 hours. Then, louder, for Mrs. Holcomb and the neighborhood to hear, she said, "Please stop making a scene in front of the children." A scene. I had been in the driveway for 3 minutes. Rachel opened her door, looked at the kids, and called out, "Be good for Aunt Caroline. Mommy deserves to be happy too." Then she got in. And they left me there, holding June's mitten in my teeth while Jack cried because no one had buckled him yet. That should have been the worst part. It wasn't. Because when I got inside and finally lined the kids up on the mudroom bench and asked the simple questions adults are supposed to answer before leaving 4 minors behind. Where are your meds? What time do you sleep? Who's allergic to what? I realized this wasn't careless. It was planned. In my family, I had been cast in one role so long that everyone treated it like biology. Rachel was the heart. I was the spine. Rachel was overwhelmed. I was capable. Rachel needed help. I was help. She got grace for every mess because she cried prettily and had children and knew exactly when to make her voice shake. I got handed things because I was competent, unmarried, child-free, and had committed the unforgivable sin of not collapsing in public. By the time I was 12, I was babysitting Rachel at church potlucks, while people told my mother how lucky she was to have one easy daughter. By 15, I was missing birthday parties because Rachel had dance competitions and somebody had to watch the neighbor kids she volunteered to sit for and forgot about. By 22, when I turned down a weekend family trip because I had a final, my mother told 3 aunts I was becoming cold. When Rachel got pregnant at 23 and again at 25, and then with the twins 3 years later, my mother found her purpose. Grandma, rescuer, martyr. She bought matching Easter outfits, posted Bible verses about motherhood, and told anyone listening that Rachel was doing the hardest job in the world. When I got promoted twice, moved to Phoenix, and started traveling for work, the family translated that as lonely, not successful, not independent, lonely. The story they told about me was simple and useful. Caroline is difficult. Caroline is distant. Caroline thinks she's better than everyone. Caroline doesn't understand real sacrifice. That false narrative had protected Rachel for years. It let her show up late, forget school pickups, borrow money, weaponize tears, and still be treated like a delicate little thing. It let my mother turn my reliability into a public character flaw. If I objected, I was selfish. If I complied, I was available again next time. They thought I was powerless because I came alone. Because I didn't have children. Because part of me still wanted my mother to love me enough not to do something like this. They had no idea what they'd triggered. I audit fraud for a living. Not taxes. Not basic bookkeeping. Fraud. I spend my weeks listening to people tell me a version of reality that falls apart the second you line up the timestamps, the receipts, the deleted messages, and the thing they forgot a camera caught in the background. So when I opened that diaper bag and found 3 juice boxes, 2 pull-ups, 1 inhaler expiring in January, no spacer, no written instructions, and no chargers for the kids' tablets even though Rachel never let them sit without screens for more than 10 minutes, my brain didn't go to family drama. It went straight to evidence. I checked the kitchen. The turkey was still frozen. There was 1 gallon of milk, half a carton of eggs, ketchup, 2 yogurts, and a bottle of white wine already open. No groceries for Christmas dinner. No wrapped gifts under the tree, except 4 labeled for the kids from Santa and 1 from my mother to Rachel with an expensive boutique ribbon I recognized from downtown Carmel. Nothing for me. That didn't hurt the way it used to. What hurt was how unsurprised I was. Then I went upstairs to the guest room and opened my carry-on. The red envelope was still there under my sweater. Pritchard and Lowe, attorneys at law. Inside were copies of my grandmother Evelyn's final trust amendment, her handwritten letter, and the account summary I had not yet confronted my mother about. I touched the edge of the envelope once, put it back, zipped the bag, and went downstairs to make macaroni for 4 kids who thought they were spending Christmas Eve with adults who loved them enough to stay. At 8:14 p.m., while Jack was crying because he wanted his frog pajamas and they weren't packed, I got the first piece of proof. Not from my mother. From my mother's Ring account. Because 2 years earlier, after a burglary scare, I was the one who researched the cameras, bought the subscription, set up the app, and made myself the backup admin when my mother forgot her passwords for the 3rd time. She never remembered to remove me. And at 5:42 p.m., the driveway camera had recorded everything. I watched it with the volume low while the twins finally drifted off on the living room rug. Rachel came out first with her cosmetic bag and the white puffer coat she only wore when she expected photos. My mother followed, carrying 2 wine totes. Then, Rachel said the line that made my stomach go completely cold. "Just tell her after she's in the house. If you do it outside, she'll bolt." My mother answered, "She won't bolt. She cares too much about looking cruel." Then Rachel laughed and said, "Exactly. Not frazzled. Not desperate. Not one little emergency. A setup. A clean, rehearsed, smug little setup built around the fact that they believed my fear of being judged would override my right to say no. The second clip was worse. At 5:47 p.m., just before I came out with my suitcase, my mother adjusted her scarf, looked straight toward the door, and said, "And if she starts with one of her speeches, just go. Once the kids see us leave, she'll fold." I replayed that line 3 times. Just go. She'll fold. I took screenshots. I downloaded the clips. Then I texted both of them one sentence. "You left 4 children without my consent, without medical instructions, and without a confirmed return time. I am documenting everything." Neither one replied. At 10:03 p.m., my sister finally broke silence with 6 words. "Stop being insane. We'll be back Sunday." Sunday. They had told me 48 hours in the driveway. It was Thursday night. The first real crack in their plan came from Ella. She was 7, all sharp collarbones and giant brown eyes, and the kind of politeness that only shows up in kids who are used to managing adult moods. She kept saying she was fine. Then, around midnight, I heard her breathing change. Not dramatic, just wrong. A dry, tight little whistle under every inhale. I found the inhaler in the diaper bag, side pocket with 6 puffs left and no spacer. She told me, very carefully, that Mommy sometimes forgot the spacer, but it was okay if I breathe slow. Children should never know how to make an adult's negligence sound normal. I loaded all 4 kids into the SUV because my rental was still at the airport lot. I hadn't even gotten my own car yet, buckled everyone in, and drove 23 minutes to urgent care through sleet. With June, asleep in my lap, hand on the center console, and Mason, pretending not to be scared. The nurse asked for insurance. I didn't have it. She asked for parental authorization. I didn't have that either. She asked where the mother was. I said, "At a resort, apparently." That was the first time I heard how brutal the truth sounded out loud. Ella got treated. Nebulizer. Steroid script. Mild flare, caught in time. Caught in time because I was there. Not because her mother was careful. While we waited, Mason whispered, "Please don't tell Mom I said this, but she's been planning the trip since Thanksgiving." I looked at him. He stared at the floor tile and added, "Grandma said if we told, Aunt Caroline might make it weird. Kids always know. They just don't know what to do with what they know." At 12:41 a.m., sitting in urgent care under fluorescent lights with a pharmacy receipt in one hand and discharge papers in the other, I got a location ping. My mother had forgotten she was still sharing her location with me. Aspen Ridge Lodge. 2 hours and 14 minutes south. Not a nearby friend's house. Not a last-minute emergency. A spa resort with couples cabins and cedar hot tubs. I took the screenshot. Then I looked at my phone long enough to make one decision that changed the entire rest of the story. I did not send it to the family group chat. I did not call my aunts. I did not beg. I went silent. That silence was the first thing that frightened them. People like my mother survive on being first to frame the story. She had counted on me sending emotional texts she could forward out of context. She had counted on me sounding angry and unstable while she sounded patient and maternal. Instead, I gave her nothing. I got the kids home. I set Mason up with blankets on the couch because he said sleeping near the front door made him feel safer. I put the twins in the downstairs bedroom because I didn't trust sleepwalking on unfamiliar stairs. I sat at the kitchen island at 2:07 a.m., opened a legal pad, and made a timeline. 5:42 p.m., driveway clip. 5:47 p.m., driveway clip. 8:14 p.m., download confirmation. 10:03 p.m., back Sunday. 12:16 a.m., urgent care intake. 12:41 a.m., resort location. Then I wrote something else at the top of the page. If they want the truth public, let them earn it. At 7:26 the next morning, the first lie hit the family group chat. My mother, Caroline, offered to keep the kids while Rachel and I got some rest. Please pray for peace and no more drama. That message had 9 heart reactions in under 2 minutes. I watched the reactions come in while I stood at the stove, flipping dinosaur pancakes because it was Christmas Eve morning now, and 4 children were waiting to see what kind of adult I would be. Aunt Denise wrote, "So glad you girls worked it out." Cousin Melanie added, "Caroline, proud of you for stepping up." Even Bethany from church, who wasn't technically family but somehow lived inside every family event, typed, "Beautiful example of grace." Grace. I looked over at Ella inhaling steam from a mug because her chest still sounded tight, and something in me turned precise. Not hot. Not wild. Precise. I took one photo, the urgent care wristband on Ella's small arm beside the pharmacy receipt time-stamped 12:28 a.m. Then I typed exactly one sentence into the group chat. Did Rachel rest before or after leaving her child without a spacer and without consent forms while she checked into Aspen Ridge Lodge at 8:52 p.m.? I attached nothing else. Just the question. The chat went still. Not a single heart. Not a single prayer emoji. Nothing for 43 seconds. Then my phone started vibrating so hard it crawled across the granite. Mom calling. Rachel calling. Mom calling again. I let every call ring out. Mason looked up from the table and said, "Are we in trouble?" I crouched beside him and said, "No, the adults who lied are." At 8:11 a.m., the first person who mattered called. Not my mother. Not Rachel. Matt. Rachel's ex-husband, and the father of all 4 kids. Matt and I were not close, but we had one thing in common: years of watching Rachel dodge consequences while other people cleaned up after her. He did not waste time. "Is Ella okay?" That was his first question. Not what happened. Not what did Rachel say. Is Ella okay? I told him yes. Urgent care, steroid script, discharge papers, kids safe. There was a long pause, then a sound like someone setting down a coffee mug very carefully. "Caroline," he said, "Rachel told me your mom invited you out and you wanted time with the kids." I laughed once. It came out ugly. He said, quieter. I figured. Then he told me something Rachel had never intended for me to know. They had a custody review on January 9. Nothing sensational. Just a scheduled review after Rachel missed 2 exchange times in November and left the twins with a sitter overnight without answering her phone. The judge had already warned her, in writing, about availability and medical consistency. And now it was Christmas. She had disappeared with her mother to a resort, and her daughter had landed in urgent care under my name with no parental authorization. There are moments when somebody else's bad character suddenly snaps into a shape so clear you can't believe you ever missed it. That was one of them. Matt asked if he could come get the kids. I looked at the 4 faces in the kitchen. The twins with syrup on their cheeks, Ella in my mother's oversized robe, Mason pretending not to listen. "Come," I said, "but bring Ella's insurance card if you have it, because I paid cash." He was at the house in 36 minutes. When Matt walked in, Ella ran to him so hard she nearly slid on the hardwood. He looked wrecked. Jeans, boots, day-old stubble, anger held together by discipline. He hugged all 4 kids, then stood up and said, "Show me everything." So I did. Not speeches. Not family history. Just evidence. The driveway clip. The location screenshot. The urgent care paperwork. Rachel's back Sunday text. And one more thing I had almost forgotten because it came in while I was measuring cough syrup at 6:52 a.m. A 28-second voicemail. My mother had butt dialed me. You could hear hotel lobby music in the background, a rolling suitcase, Rachel laughing, and then my mother's voice saying, "Ignore her. She always acts big when she has no leverage." Then Rachel answered, "If she keeps the kids through Monday, I can still make the salon appointment." Monday. Not Sunday. Matt stared at the phone like it might burst into flames. Then he looked at me and said, "Send me all of it." I did. He forwarded it to his attorney while standing in my mother's kitchen. I watched that happen in real time. That was the first visible crack in Rachel's power. At 9:38 a.m., my mother sent a message she never would have sent if she weren't scared. Not angry. Scared. What do you want? People like her only ask that when they've realized apologies aren't the currency anymore. What I wanted had nothing to do with one chaotic weekend. That was the thing they still didn't understand. I wasn't deciding whether to forgive a rude stunt. I was deciding whether to stop protecting two women who had spent years turning my competence into their emergency exit. My grandmother Evelyn died in October. Everyone knew that part. What most people did not know was how bad the last 6 months had been. Not physically, logistically, financially, quietly. Grandma had always been sharp, right up until the end, and sharp old women notice patterns. She noticed that small withdrawals kept happening from the account I helped her monitor after her eyesight got bad. $280, $420, $975. Not enormous, just enough to be called misunderstandings if anyone got caught. She noticed Rachel suddenly had fresh highlights after telling everyone daycare costs were crushing her. She noticed my mother stopped bringing receipts when she picked up groceries for her. She noticed that whenever she asked where her blue cash envelope went, my mother somehow found a reason to cry. 3 weeks before she died, Grandma asked me to sit at the edge of her hospital bed and bring her yellow legal pad. Then she dictated names, dates, and amounts in that dry, furious little whisper women of her generation use when they have decided to stop being polite. 11 withdrawals. $18,400. Not enough to destroy lives. Enough to reveal character. Then, she called her attorney. That was how I became sole trustee of the lake house and the education account she created for the great-grandkids. Not because I was her favorite, because I was the one she trusted to finish what she started. And until Christmas Eve in my mother's driveway, I had still been thinking like a daughter instead of an executor. I had been considering mercy. I had been considering an arrangement where Rachel could stay at the lake house for 6 months after the sale deadline, where the repayment schedule stayed private, where my mother's reputation in church remained mostly intact. Then they left 4 children on me and turned off their phones. Mercy left with them. At 10:22 a.m., my phone showed 19 missed calls, 12 texts, and 1 message from Aunt Denise that changed the temperature completely. Linda says you had some kind of episode. Are the children actually safe? My mother had made her move. Of course she had. That was her oldest trick. When she sensed facts coming, she moved fast and made the question my temperament instead of her behavior. By noon, 3 versions of me were apparently circulating through the family. In one, I was punishing Rachel for being a mother. In another, I was unstable from work stress. In my favorite version, I was jealous because no one made a big deal about me coming home. I read that one twice because even for my family, it was elegant in its cruelty. Not only had they abandoned 4 kids with me, they were now reframing my reaction as a symptom of personal emptiness. That's what image-obsessed families do. They don't just hurt you, they narrate your pain in a way that turns it into your fault. So I stopped thinking about feelings. I started assembling a packet, not for revenge, for clarity. I printed the urgent care discharge papers from my mother's office printer. I exported the ring clips to a folder on my laptop. I saved the voicemail twice. I photographed the diaper bag contents laid out on the dining room table. No spacer, no spare meds, no nighttime pull-ups, 1 stained shirt for Jack, no socks for June, stale crackers, 2 melted candy canes. Then I went upstairs, took the red envelope out of my suitcase, and added Grandma's letter to the stack. By the time Matt texted that the kids were settled at his place, I had 27 pages clipped together. The packet looked a lot like peace. At 1:06 p.m., Rachel finally sent the text that ended any chance of me softening. If you involve Matt in this, you'll regret it. No apology for Ella. No question about the kids. Just a threat. So I gave her one answer. You already involved him when you abandoned his children. Then I blocked her for 3 hours. You learn a lot about people when you remove access to your immediate reaction. The panic came in waves. First, my mother switched tactics and started sounding maternal. Caroline, sweetheart, let's not make permanent decisions over a misunderstanding. Then righteous. I cannot believe you would hand those children to Matt on Christmas. Then wounded. After I paid for your flight. That line almost made me smile. Because yes, she had paid for the flight. She had repeated that fact 3 separate times since I landed. Like it was a deed I should kneel before. What she didn't know was that the flight wasn't the leverage she thought it was. The red envelope in my suitcase represented a property valued at $680,000, a restricted account she could no longer touch, and a handwritten directive from Grandma that specifically said, in her shaky blue pen, "Do not let guilt decide this for you." I kept hearing that sentence all day. Do not let guilt decide this for you. At 2:18 p.m., Bethany from church called. Then Aunt Denise. Then Cousin Melanie. Same questions, different tone, not accusatory anymore. Curious. Curiosity is the first crack before belief changes sides. I gave them all the same answer. The children are safe. I have documentation. I won't discuss it by phone. Nothing makes liars more nervous than a calm person with paperwork. At 3:02 p.m., my mother sent the only truly honest text of the entire weekend. Please don't show Denise anything until we get back. Not, are the children okay? Not, can we fix this? Don't show Denise. Which told me exactly what she feared. Not truth. Witnesses. Our family's main event every year wasn't Christmas Day dinner. It was the Boxing Day brunch at Aunt Denise's house on the 26th. Everyone came. Aunts, cousins, in-laws, neighbors who might as well have been relatives, church friends, 2 old ladies who had known my grandmother since high school and missed nothing. My mother loved that brunch because it let her lock in the official version of the holiday before anyone compared notes. And this year, she was counting on getting there first. But by then, I had something she didn't. Time-stamped proof. And silence had done its work. People were already asking themselves why a stable, boring, cold woman like me had suddenly gone so still while 2 louder women spiraled all over the phone. By Christmas night, my mother had sent 43 texts. Rachel had sent 19 before I blocked her again. Matt's attorney had already requested copies of the urgent care documents. And I had spoken only once to Mr. Pritchard, Grandma's attorney. I didn't ask for guidance. I asked one question. If I decide not to extend grace on occupancy or repayment timing, what becomes effective first? He answered without hesitation. The lake house sale notice and the demand letters. I stared out at my mother's dark backyard after that call and watched snow collect on the trampoline Rachel's kids used when they visited. Then I said, prepare them. That was the moment the story stopped being about surviving what they did to me and started becoming about what they had finally cost themselves. The next morning, I drove to Aunt Denise's house with a banker's box in my trunk, not because I needed all of it. Because weight matters. A thin folder looks like gossip. A box looks like consequences. I knew my mother would perform the second I walked in. She did not disappoint. Denise's house smelled like cinnamon rolls and burnt coffee, and people were still taking coats when my mother spotted me in the foyer and put her hand to her chest like a widow in a stage play. There she is, she said loudly. Thank God. Caroline, where have you been? We have all been sick with worry. Sick. Rachel was beside her in cream knitwear and curled hair, eyes puffy in a way that told me she had practiced crying on the drive up. Bethany hovered near the dining table, with the expression of a woman who absolutely knew better than to be this excited. All eyes turned. My mother crossed the room and tried to hug me. I stepped back. The silence that followed was small but exquisite. Then Rachel said, "Can you at least not do this here?" There it was, the plea beneath the performance. Not don't expose us. Not in front of witnesses. I set the banker's box down on Denise's entry bench, took off my gloves, and said, very evenly, actually, here is exactly where we're doing it. You could feel the room change. Not because people knew the facts yet, because for the first time in my life, I was not protecting my mother from the consequences of her own choices. I didn't dump everything at once. That would have felt chaotic. I took out 3 items. First, the urgent care paperwork with Ella's name and the notation, parent unavailable, aunt present, no consent provided. I handed it to Denise. Second, the screenshot of my mother's shared location at Aspen Ridge Lodge, time-stamped 8:52 p.m., Christmas Eve. I handed that to Bethany, because if Bethany saw it, half the room would know it was real before she even looked up. Third, I played the voicemail. Not the whole thing, just the clearest 12 seconds. My mother's voice. Ignore her. She always acts big when she has no leverage. Rachel's voice. Laughing. If she keeps the kids through Monday, I can still make the salon appointment. No one in the room moved. No one. Even the cousins in the kitchen went silent. The only sound was Denise setting the urgent care paper down on the table like it had weight. Rachel's face lost all color. My mother recovered first, because of course she did. She pointed at me and said, "You recorded us?" I said, "No, you called me." That landed harder than any accusation could have. Because there's nothing people hate more than being exposed by their own carelessness. Then came the move I knew my mother would try if cornered. Minimize. "We were gone one night," she said. "Caroline is making this sound criminal." I opened the packet and slid out Rachel's text. "Back Sunday." Then I played the second clip from the driveway camera. My mother's own voice. "Once the kids see us leave, she'll fold." The room changed again. That sentence told them everything that no legal explanation could. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was strategy. My Aunt Denise read the text, looked up at Rachel, and said, "You planned this?" Rachel started crying. Not from shame. From failure. "You don't understand how exhausted I am," she said. "Nobody ever helps me." Matt stepped into the doorway right then. I hadn't invited him in for drama. He had dropped off the kids' forgotten winter boots Denise had offered to collect, and he walked into the exact second Rachel chose self-pity over accountability. Perfect timing has a sound. It sounds like a screen door shutting behind a man who is done being lied to. He looked at the room, then at Rachel, and said, "You left Ella without a spacer." Rachel actually flinched. That one detail cut through everything because it was specific and maternal and impossible to reframe. Not family conflict. Not sibling resentment. Your child couldn't breathe, and you were in a hot tub. My mother tried to pull focus again. She always did when Rachel was losing. She said, "This is turning ugly for no reason." That was when I opened the red envelope. You could hear paper when I pulled out Grandma Evelyn's letter. It was written in blue ink on lined yellow pad paper, 3 pages long, shaky but readable, dated 19 days before she died. I did not read every line. I read the 2 that mattered most. If Linda or Rachel pressures Caroline to keep peace instead of keeping accounts, that is proof I chose the correct trustee. And then, the lake house is to be sold. Net proceeds are to fund the children's education accounts equally. Linda is not to reside there, borrow against it, promise it, or represent it as hers to give. The silence after that was different from the earlier silence. Earlier, people had been shocked. Now they were recalculating years. My mother's mouth actually opened a little, because suddenly her panic from the last 24 hours made sense to everyone. This wasn't just about the kids. She had assumed I would come home, absorb the holiday labor, and then sit quietly while she strong-armed me into letting Rachel slide into the lake house by spring. That had been the real plan. Family Christmas. Guilt. Public pressure. Soften Caroline up. Make her pliable. Then talk about what's best for the children. I could almost admire the architecture of it. Almost, Rachel said too quickly. Grandma wanted me to have that house. I pulled the trust amendment from the envelope and laid it beside the letter. No, I said. She wanted your children provided for. That is not the same thing as rewarding you. Rachel looked at my mother then. Not me. My mother. And in that tiny movement, half the room understood something else. Rachel had been promised something my mother had no right to promise. This was the part where lesser stories slow down and drown in numbers. I didn't. I used exactly what mattered. I placed one sheet on the dining table. The account summary. 11 highlighted withdrawals. Total. $18,400. Beside it, I laid copies of 3 checks Grandma never wrote and 2 ATM withdrawals made on days she was physically in the hospital. I didn't need more than that. Not in a room full of adults old enough to understand what patterns mean. Denise sat down. Bethany whispered, "Linda." My mother's face went waxy. She tried one last pivot. Your grandmother was confused near the end. That was the wrong move. Because old women who spent 50 years balancing church budgets and coupon binders are many things. Confused is not the word to use in front of the people who knew them best. Mrs. Alvarez, one of Grandma's oldest friends, set down her coffee and said, Evelyn was not confused. She told me in November that someone was stealing from her and she finally had the proof. You could almost feel the blood leave my mother's body. That was the social reversal. Not when I spoke. When another woman she could not control confirmed it. After that, the witnesses multiplied fast. Aunt Denise asked Rachel point blank whether the salon charge on Grandma's card in September was hers. Rachel did that blinking thing liars do when they hope tears can buy time. Matt said nothing. He didn't need to. Bethany quietly moved away from my mother and toward the far side of the room, like physical distance might protect her from contamination. Cousin Melanie asked why Linda told everyone I volunteered. My mother tried to answer. No one let her finish. Then Denise asked the question I had been waiting for all weekend. Caroline, when were you planning to tell us? I looked at the banker's box, then back at her. After Christmas, I said. I was trying to keep this private. No theatrics. Just truth. That sentence did more damage than rage ever could. Because it revealed the full contrast. I had tried to preserve their dignity. They had baited me into unpaid childcare, lied about it, endangered a child, and then smeared me to the family before I spoke. There is no recovering cleanly from that comparison. Rachel still had one move left. Attack me. She straightened, wiped her face, and said, This is exactly who you are. You wait. You collect things. You make yourself look perfect while everyone else looks human. That line would have destroyed me 10 years earlier. Instead, I nodded. You're right, I said. I do collect things. Then I tapped the box. Voicemails, receipts, timestamps, court-ready copies. Because when people like you hurt others, you count on emotion to blur the edges. I prefer edges sharp. I watched that hit her. Watched the exact second she realized charm was no longer enough. Power doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like not needing to repeat yourself. Sometimes it looks like a room that used to tilt toward your mother, suddenly tilting toward the facts. Sometimes it looks like your own hand staying steady while the woman who raised you can't hold her coffee cup right anymore. Mr. Pritchard had emailed me at 8:03 that morning, just before I drove over. Prepared for your instruction, he wrote. In my coat pocket was the signed letter authorizing the lake house to be listed on January 3 and the demand notices to be sent that same week regarding the missing funds. I hadn't decided whether to mention that yet. Then my mother made one final mistake. She hissed, low enough that she thought only I could hear. If you do this, don't expect to be part of this family again. There it was. The oldest weapon. Exile. As if I hadn't been living inside it for years. I looked at her and realized something so clean it almost felt merciful. She still thought belonging was hers to grant. It wasn't. Not anymore. So I reached into my coat, took out the instruction letter, and handed it to Denise to read. Actually, I said, it's already done. You should have seen Rachel's face when Denise got to the line about immediate listing and restricted access. Not crying. Not anger. Panic. Because that was the moment the fantasy ended. No lake house. No free place to land. No more vague promises from Mom about working it out. Just locks, appraisals, and legal mail. The payoff wasn't explosive. That's why it was perfect. No screaming. No plates thrown. No dramatic storming out. Just a chain of very specific things happening in very specific order. Denise read the instruction letter. Matt asked for copies of the urgent care documents and voicemail transcript for his attorney. Mrs. Alvarez asked Bethany, in front of everyone, whether church finance should perhaps review the memorial fund Linda had been helping with. Bethany went pale and said she would look into procedures. Rachel tried to sit down and missed the chair edge. My mother reached for the papers. I moved them out of reach. Then I said the only speech I gave all weekend. You flew me home under false pretenses. You left 4 children on me without my consent. You turned off your phones. Ella ended up in urgent care. You lied to the family. And while you were doing all of that, you expected me to quietly sign over a future you had no right to promise. I'm done making your choices survivable. That was it. No sermon. No begging. Just the charges. My mother stared at me like she had never seen me before. Maybe she hadn't. Because the version of me she believed in, the one who would swallow humiliation to keep the peace, was gone. Rachel muttered, "You're destroying us." I said, "No. I'm documenting what you did." Then, I took the red envelope, put the originals back inside, and closed it. The sound of that paper sliding shut was the cleanest thing I heard all year. After that, the fallout moved quickly, because truth, once anchored, doesn't need much help. Matt filed what he needed to file. I didn't involve myself beyond giving him copies. Mr. Pritchard sent the first letters on January 3. The lake house was photographed 2 days later, listed the next week, and under contract by February. The proceeds went where Grandma wanted them to go. Equal education accounts for Mason, Ella, Jack, and June, with strict trustee controls and annual reporting. Rachel did not get keys. My mother did not get to hold funds for safekeeping. The repayment demand on the missing $18,400 was private at first. Then not so private once Denise refused to be a shield for anyone. Church got very quiet around my mother after that. Not because of gossip. Because women her age know the difference between a mistake and a pattern. I paid my own hotel bill for the last 2 nights, changed my return flight, and left without going back to my mother's house alone. Denise came with me to collect my suitcase. The turkey was still in the sink, thawed now, gray around the edges. There was something fitting about that. A whole fake holiday sitting there, spoiled because the people who staged it assumed someone else would do the work. My mother followed us room to room, saying variations of the same sentence. "We can still fix this." No, we couldn't. You can fix a scheduling mistake. You can fix forgetting the cranberry sauce. You can fix ugly words said too fast. You cannot fix being seen clearly after years of hiding behind family. Before I left, I removed myself from the Ring account, canceled the subscription I had been paying, and set the admin email back to hers. Not revenge. Just boundaries. Then I put my keys on the counter. She looked at them, then at me, and asked, smaller than I had ever heard her sound, "So that's it?" I thought about all the years I spent being useful enough to be included and invisible enough to be blamed. I thought about Ella's wristband, Mason's whisper in urgent care, the driveway clip. "She'll fold." Then I said, "No, that was it. This is after." I walked out while Denise held the storm door open. No one chased me. They flew me home, expecting free labor and silence. What they got instead was documentation, witnesses, and a Christmas none of them will ever be able to rewrite.